Welcome to Group 3's presentation on stereotyping. This presentation is prepared and presented by Tammy Dirksen, Philip Law, Carolyn Richards, Stacey Stevens, and Christina Zachariah. We respectfully acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Samanaho, Tawasin peoples on whose unpreceded traditional territories our three Simon Fraser University campuses reside.
Today, we are going to talk about stereotyping in organizations. We will cover what stereotyping is, why people stereotype. We will give an overview of attribution and the self-fulfilling process, and we will discuss why these are relevant to the study of organizational behavior. So let's begin. Stereotyping is the process of assigning specific individual characteristics to a particular group of people and then automatically transferring those characteristics to anyone that matches those features into that group. Stereotypes can be grounded in large categories such as culture, race, gender, or sexual orientation. There are more minor types such as external physical characteristics or internal attributes such as traits or abilities. There are a few reasons why people engage in stereotyping. Stereotyping can be an effective way to categorize large amounts of information because it simplifies the world around us. People look to understand and anticipate how others will behave. Stereotyping can be motivated by the need for one's own social identity and self-enhancement. It can also be inspired by the need for belonging, defining one's own social identity and self-enhancement by a group they belong to or have an emotional attachment to. And perhaps most importantly, it is a consequence of diverse peoples trying to make sense of their environment by categorizing individuals by their internal and external attributes. This consequence of stereotyping is explained in attribution theory. When we observe a behavior or event, we tend to form a belief about what caused it. Our reasoning will determine whether the behavior or event was caused by an internal factor or an external factor. This process is referred to as attribution, and the attribution theory helps us explain and understand the attribution process. Attribution theory is important for organizations because it can help managers understand some of the causes of employee behavior and can assist employees in understanding their thinking about their behaviors. If you can understand why you behave a certain way and why others around you do, you better understand yourself, others, and your organization. The perception of the causes of a specific behavior may also affect both managers' and employees' judgment and actions, playing a significant role in motivation. You want to understand the reason for your actions and understand the reasons behind the actions other people take. You want to attribute causes to these behaviors to give a feeling of control over your behaviors and related situations.
When we judge the cause for an external event or someone else's behaviors, there are also three important factors to consider: distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Today, we would like to introduce you to an employee named Tammy to help explain attribution theory and these factors. The first factor, distinctiveness. It refers to how behaviors can be displayed differently depending on the situation. If the behavior seems unusual, it is external. For example, it is uncommon for Tammy to be late, so her manager will likely determine that it was out of her control. However, if she is late regularly, it would probably be considered an internal attribution. Secondly, a behavior can show consensus, when everyone facing the same situation responds in the same way. For instance, if all of Tammy's colleagues complete their required tasks on time, the manager may make an internal attribution due to factors being considered within the group's control. However, if all employees were late in meeting their deadlines, the manager may take an external attribution that situational factors outside the group's control may be to blame. The last defining factor is consistency in a person's action. If Tammy is late for meetings most of the time, her manager will attribute this behavior to internal causes. However, if Tammy is not consistent in this behavior and is rarely late for meetings, her manager will attribute it to external causes. Unfortunately, the attribution process relies on perception and therefore is susceptible to errors. The two common errors are self-serving bias, the tendency we have to attribute our failures to external causes more than internal causes, while crediting our successes more to internal than external factors. We tend to overestimate internal factors and underestimate external factors. For instance, blaming failure on external factors while taking credit for the successes. If Tammy does not meet her sales target, she might blame it on the economy. While if she succeeds her targets, she could attribute this to her hard work because she exceeds the organization's expectations. Second, fundamental attribution error or correspondence bias. It is the tendency to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors in judging others' behavior. We are inclined to ignore situations or external factors that might have played a role with others, but tend to focus on situational factors that affect our behavior primarily. If Tammy misses a work deadline, these two biases could contribute to judgment errors. For instance, self-serving bias directs our focus on external factors such as experiencing internal problems that results in missing a work deadline. However, when someone else misses a work deadline, we are more likely to employ the correspondence bias and focus on internal factors such as their lack of ability or mismanagement of time. As mentioned earlier, people stereotype because they are trying to understand and anticipate how others will behave.
This can be explained in the self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a perceptual process in which our expectations about another person cause that person to act more consistently with those expectations. Research found that disadvantaged students whose teachers expected them to perform well had higher grades than disadvantaged students whose teachers expected them to do poorly. From a supervisor to subordinate point of view, the self-fulfilling prophecy has 4 steps. Step 1, the supervisor forms expectations about the subordinate. Step 2, the supervisor's expectations affect their behavior towards the subordinate. Step 3, the supervisor's behavior affects the subordinate's ability and motivation. Step 4, the subordinate's behavior becomes more consistent with the supervisor's expectations. We'll take a look at an example of how stereotyping fits into a self-fulfilling prophecy in an organization. The organization requires Tammy to lift upwards of 40 pounds as part of her job responsibility. A supervisor could stereotype Tammy by body weight or type, assuming she is not fit enough or strong enough to complete her job duties. Let's consider this stereotype scenario within a 4-step self-fulfilling prophecy. So step 1, the supervisor forms their expectation by looking at Tammy's physical characteristics. Step 2, the supervisor's experiences affect their behavior towards Tammy. For example, they may adapt tasks they give to Tammy to meet their perceived expectations. This could leave Tammy behind in her development because she has been given fewer tasks than everybody else, or she may experience discriminatory remarks from her supervisor. Step 3, hearing unkind comments can affect the employee's confidence, ability, and motivation to perform their job duties. For example, Tammy might think, if my supervisor doesn't believe in my ability to achieve this task, why should I perform? Maybe I can't do the job. Step 4, Tammy's work behavior becomes consistent with her supervisor's expectations. When we hold a stereotype about a person, we have expectations that he or she will fulfill that stereotype, and we treat this person accordingly. This treatment can often influence the person to act accordingly to our stereotypic expectations, thus confirming our stereotypic beliefs. This is an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Let's take a look at the relevance of attribution theory and self-fulfilling prophecy in organizational behavior. As we see, the attribution theory determines whether an internal or external factor caused the behavior or event. This identifies the reasons for the actions that people take rather than just making assumptions about the situation. Why is this important? When we look at Tammy's examples, if management considered the situation without examining the context, It could negatively affect the employee because a different factor could cause every case. Earlier, we explained how 3 important factors, consistency, distinctiveness, and consensus, can be applied to validate perceptions by pointing towards what is perceived as the external or internal causes of a situation. It can affect the decisions of management in taking the proper steps to lead to inaccurate judgments. It also is an important component for understanding organizational behavior because the perceived outcomes will affect management decisions and subsequent actions. To best support Tammy, a supervisor needs to be more self-aware of how their own biases, formed personal experiences, and how these stereotypes can cloud their judgment. By focusing on Tammy's strengths and what she brings to a team rather than weaknesses or perceived weaknesses defined by stereotyping, a more positive organizational behavior will occur. Having a more optimistic and neutral outlook, telling an employee they can and believing in their ability and motivation, self-fulfilling prophecy can be used positively right from the beginning.
The halo or horns effect. Halo, allowing someone's positive or negative trait to spill over from one personality area to another. For example, when looking through someone's work experience that we like, we tend to see everything else about that person surrounded by the glow of a certain achievement rather than by the actual requirements or objectives of the role. Horns, the opposite, where we see one bad thing about a person and we let it cloud our opinions of their attributes. For example, when interviewing someone, we might be put off by the fact that they speak very slow because of our unconscious bias has caused us to assume that someone who speaks slowly is unintelligent. If we assume they're unintelligent, everything they say or do for the rest of the interview will be clouded by our judgment. Especially, it is important if you tend to easily make assumptions about people. Ask yourself, is the fact that this person is good at one thing impacting how I feel about other things they do? How can I separate the two? Can I get another outside perspective? Similarity, tendency to give preferential treatment to people who are similar to us. Naturally, we want to surround ourselves with people we feel are similar to us. And as a result, we tend to want to work more with people who are like us. In terms of recruitment, that may mean that we are more open to hiring individuals we see parts of ourselves in. Think of a time that you might have displayed the similarity or contrast effect, be it in the workplace or outside the workplace. Also think about when this bias may have been used against you. Ask yourself, is this person's style similar or different to my own? Is that impacting how I interpret the value of this person? Is that impacting how I value those who are different? When we make a judgment about another person, we subconsciously look for evidence to back up our own opinions of that person. We do this because we want to believe we're right and that we've made the right assessment of a person.
Understand, self-assess, acknowledge and be vigilant of your verbal and nonverbal actions. Establish upfront criteria. Lay out decision-making criteria in advance. Batch decisions. Make similar decisions in the same block of time as best as possible. Make room for different styles. Question expectations that favor dominant versus non-dominant groups or cultures. Look for patterns. Step back and look for unintended patterns across gender, race, and other identities. Get broad, diverse input. Whenever possible, get input from broad and diverse group of people.
We'll now look at how to avoid stereotyping in the workplace. First, recognize and accept that everyone has biases. We all have biases that we need to continuously try to improve and manage. Second, shine a light on yourself. Don't be afraid to self-evaluate your biases and self-regulate your biases. Third, practice constructive uncertainty. If you aren't sure, ask others in a sensitive manner. Fourth, explore awkwardness and discomfort. Some situations may be awkward and make you uncomfortable, but this is how we grow and learn to address our cultural deficits. And last, learn more about people. Make it a goal to get out of your comfort zone and learn more about those who are different than you. Thank you for listening to our presentation on stereotyping.